Hi, everyone. Welcome to Keys to the Shift. I'm Steve, your host, with my best buddy, Kevin. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm awesome, Steve. Thanks for asking. Great to be with you and everybody else.
Indeed. Always fun to get together.
Yeah.
Tonight, we are going to introduce our next topic of discussion, both for our physical meetup as well as for the Facebook group. And this is really kind of a add-on or adjunct to the two previous topics that we've done, which were religion and politics. And so these are two substantial institutions, is what I call them, because they affect all of society. Whether people are aware of or consider the shift or not, these are part of which we are all part throughout society, regardless of who we are. And we've had some great discussions on those topics. But in order to kind of round up the conversation, Kevin and I were thinking it would be really good to also cover other major institutions in our society. And so that's what this next topic will be, is kind of a gathering together of the remaining institutions, which none of which are as significant in our mind as the previous two, but collectively they're still fairly substantial. So we've got some questions that we put together here that we'd like to read out as well as post on the Facebook site to get people thinking and talking about these other institutions and how they impact the shift and how the shift is impacted by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm going to how they're impacted by the shift, as well as how the shift is impacted by them. I'm not sure if I said that right, but it works both ways. And that's what we'd like to bring to the table to converse on. And so Kevin and I are going to lay a few questions out. The basic topics or the basic institutions that we're going to discuss are five, and they are financial, so the financial system, business, education, government, and so this goes beyond just politics, but government in general, and then medical and health care. So those major five areas. And of course, there are still other institutions that we're leaving out here, but I think that covers the big ones.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. And so, Kevin, we'll start with financial. Why don't you throw out there the first question regarding finance?
Yeah, so the first one has to do with taxes. And the question is there some other alternative that's fair and practical to the taxation system that we have in the United States right now that still provides financial sustenance to all the infrastructures that we share as participants in the United States, such as our sewer systems, our roads, our driving privileges, law enforcement, the prison systems, things like that. So is there some other way that those things could be paid for other than by levying taxes?
Good question. Yeah. Okay. Interested to hear what people have to say about that.
Yeah. Steve, what about you?
Okay, so another financial related question, and this one is for people who are spiritually minded, because this is something they think about a lot. And most people do, is about financial abundance and what is the spiritual side of that. And so the question is if we create our own abundance, which I think most of the people in the group are at least open to, if not actually think that that's the case. Well, if we create our own abundance, then why do we even need to insist that the rich pay their share? Or why would we complain about the top 1% that don't have to pay any taxes because they have loopholes? Well, why does it matter if I create my own abundance? That shouldn't even be an issue for me. So the question is it an issue? Are we really looking at the wrong thing here when we're complaining about the rich people and how much they have to pay to support the rest of society?
You know, that's a good question, Steve, because I just read something the other day that said that selfishness is actually a virtue unless it impacts other people in a negative way. And so, part of our belief system is that we are all one. And so, if someone's suffering and we have the ability to help them with their suffering, oughtn't we be helping them? And so, that kind of plays into your question as to whether the wealthy should help the poor. If we're all one, then isn't one of our jobs to bring up those people that are suffering? So just want to throw that in as a kind of a side viewpoint to that. So go ahead, Steve. I didn't mean to hijack you, buddy.
No, good question. Thought provoking.
Yeah.
But okay, and so let's move on to the next institution, which is business. And what kind of question do you have on that?
Okay, so the good old boy system, the power hierarchy, as we call it, of big business. Are we seeing changes in the sort of the paradigm of big business, or is it sort of the same old patriarchy that we've seen in the past, or do we see changes in the in those systems of big business that would lead us to think that they're moving forward in the shift? That's the question.
Yeah, good question. And I'd be interested to hear in particular what people who are minorities, which will be women for sure, as well as guys, have to say about it, because both you and I, Kevin, were kind of the white male, older, male privilege, and it's kind of hard for us to see these things at times.
Yeah, although we do believe that women and femininity and the rise of the feminine needs to be brought forth in so many different parts of these institutions, but big business as well. And so that kind of leads into the next question, I think, Steve.
Yeah, and so okay, so I think we all see a real benefit in having more minorities fill important and decision-making positions within business. And so the question is should it be forced? In other words, should we just let it play out? And if there are women and Black people, for instance, who happen to be the most desirable, according to those who make the decisions, to fill those decision-making positions, or should there be some force applied to insist? It's kind of like forced busing, which there's a pluses and minuses to. Do you insist that there be an even distribution, or is that really creating an unnatural emphasis that really harms rather than helps? So that's the question anyway.
Well, especially, Steve, when it's a less qualified candidate who happens to be minority, do you consider them over a more qualified non-minority? And that's really, I think, the more intriguing question there. So when you talk about forcing, that's the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so this, it'd be interesting as we go forward, Kevin, to hear some of your perspectives, since you are a business owner. Now, granted, it's not a big business, small business, and you're pretty much self-employed, but there was a time when you had more employees. So anyway, you could have a perspective on it that others of us don't.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to the next category?
Okay. So next is education.
Oh, boy. So charter schools, Steve, I don't really know a lot about charter schools, so I'm not an expert on it by any means. But the question really is, should we promote charter schools as an alternative to public education? Or is that just another way to help the wealthy get their kids educated and have the best education available and move them up the ladder at the expense of those people that can't afford to participate in such a program like that?
Yeah, it's like most of these questions are really two different ways you can look at it. It's like a double-edged sword. It helps with a shift in some ways, and it hurts and kind of pulls people back in the other way. So there are no clear-cut answers to these, which is why they're they're intriguing to consider.
Absolutely. Well, what have you got, Steve?
Okay, so this is kind of again, which a lot of these questions speak to is how much power or how much enforcement responsibility should the government have for enforcing societal conventions. So, for instance, should kids be required by law to go to school or to be homeschooled or whatever it is, or to receive an education, which I think is the case now. I'm not that familiar with the laws, but I think it's a requirement that unless you're, legally homeschooled, by official specifications, then you need to be in school.
Right.
All right. So I think we can all see an advantage or a benefit to doing that, but is it right? Is it right for the government to be enforcing that, as a word of the law, with subject to punishment if you're not meeting that requirement?
That's a good question, and I'm not even touching that one, Steve. So I'll move on to the third question, which is, does government-funded college serve society in a fair way? And it's a good question because at least a couple of the candidates who are running for president believe that we should give the opportunity of a college education to every single kid that's out there. And it's a good question. And I'm not even sure how I feel about that, so I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah. So again, it's it's good food for thought, and hopefully for conversation as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So next topic.
All right. So next is government.
Oof. So are we shifters? And I'm speaking directly to the people that are probably watching this video. Are the shifters enabling us to become free or freer of government by force, to be more self-governing, with fewer laws and less law enforcement? And my feeling is that there are certain aspects of the shift that do allow for less governance, so to speak, but the vast majority of people still need to be governed in some way or other until we are all moving forward in the shift. But that's just my feeling, Steve. What about you?
Yeah. So the next question is concerning our Constitution.
Oh.
And granted, it was a brilliant piece of work for its time. It was very forward thinking, and it has lasted us for a long time and served us very well. But the question is does it continue to serve us that well now? The way it has the various branches of government divided up, it's a very polarized kind of system, which granted, for the time it was invented or imagined, it was very useful, and it really served us well in creating a nation, a prosperous nation. I think it was a strong and useful cornerstone for that. But we've evolved in our consciousness since that time, and there could be better forms of government or better structures that serve our evolved consciousness and evolving consciousness. So the question is, if that's the case, what would be better? What's better than what we have in the Constitution currently?
Yeah. And I'm not a huge believer in certain tenets of the Constitution that we have today. Gun laws are a huge issue for me, and I could talk about that for a long period of time. But I think it was appropriate back in the day. I think it's inappropriate today, and I think it actually is a disservice to us. But I'll get off my soapbox because I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about it. What's the last topic, Steve?
Okay, so the last one is medicine and healthcare, which is obviously a big one these days. It ties into politics. It ties into our individual, what we have to do in order to remain insured and not be vulnerable to unexpected medical costs and all that kind of thing. So go ahead with your question, Kevin.
Well, so is healthcare a human right or is it a commodity? that's a great dichotomy as you look at healthcare as a subject. And should it be determined by economic status or individual choice, or should it be mandated by the government, as some of the presidential candidates are considering for this upcoming election? Steve.
Yeah, and so this is kind of similar, but this is slicing it a different way, and that's really insurance in general. Not just if we have universal health care or not, but okay, so there are people who are healthy, who rarely need to go to the doctor for anything and incur very small expenses, if any, that pay the same amount into insurance, or, granted, pre-existing conditions can add, and, there are variations on it, but for the most part, the people who are healthy pay the same amount as the people who have a great, large demand on the healthcare system, and, millions, thousands and millions of dollars. And is it fair? Is it right that everyone pay the same amount? And so that applies to the way things are done now with independent insurance companies, or if we had universal health care. Obviously, we wouldn't be taxed based on our medical conditions.
Right.
It would be totally irrelevant as to what our medical condition is. And therefore, the people who need health care the least will be paying the same amount as the people who need it the most. And is that fair?
Yeah, you know what? One thing to think about in that respect, Steve, is that on any given day, someone who's super healthy can become super unhealthy. And all of a sudden they find they have cancer. They've lived this great life, super healthy people, and all of a sudden they find they have cancer. And all of a sudden in one day, they move from that category of health to a category of needing significant assistance. So you never know, right? So that's part of the...
That's going to be a good point in trying to address this question.
Yeah.
But still, I'd be interested to hear what people have to say about it.
Right. Yeah. So my question is,
well, actually, there's two more.
Well, no, I know, but my question is.
I thought you said last question. Sorry.
No, hey, quit interrupting me. So should vaccines be enforced by law? Vaccination, it's a huge issue right now, and there's a lot of debate back and forth as to the value of vaccine, and is it being pushed by big pharma, and is it really not a thing that we need to be concerned about as much, or is it something that if you don't get your kid vaccinated, should they be withheld from school and things like that? And so it's become a fairly big topic for debate, and I'm not even sure where I stand on it, but it's a good question for everybody out there.
Well, and in particular, today, just in the past couple of months with the coronavirus, I mean, they're probably going to be coming out with a vaccine for this sometime soon. And what kind of requirements should there be that people get this vaccination? So that ties into yours, but also that leads into the next question about the coronavirus. And that's, trying to step back and look at the impact that this is having on society. Is this something that serves or benefits the ship, that benefits our movement forward in some way? Well, granted, it's painful, it's frightening, and most people would say it's a bad thing and we wish it wouldn't happen.
Right.
But at the same time, there are a lot of institutions and a lot of things that happen in society that are really based on old energy, and people aren't going to let go of them easily. And unless they're actually forced to let go of them and forced through painful circumstances to let go of these old ways, they aren't going to let go of them. And is this nature's way, or God's way, however you may put it, to force us to take some steps forward that otherwise we wouldn't be taking?
Yeah, good point. Is it also a possibility that this could be a unifying force for us in terms of global unification? And I think that's a possibility as well. So I see it as there could be potential benefits, but yes, it's also, it's interesting, Steve, because I'm a big anti-fear guy. I don't believe in fear very much. And what we're seeing in the media is a huge amount of fear mongering and spreading of concern about the coronavirus. And while I believe it's something to be somewhat concerned about, I think it's being overblown in a lot of ways, but that's my own personal feelings. So I'd like to hear from everybody else that, maybe I'm not taking this seriously enough, but I do think it has some benefit to the shift, as we've talked about.
Yeah. And so,
wow, Steve, what a lot. This is a lot of stuff to be throwing out there in one freaking video. I want to just say to everybody, I'm thankful for Steve for wanting to talk about all these subjects, but boy, is this a lot of stuff.
it's a handful. And, we may have to carry it out over more than one meetup, or over multiple discussions on the Facebook page. Like you say, it's a lot. It's a lot to get your arms around. In some ways, it might have been better just to take these one at a time.
No. I think throwing them out in the beginning like this is a good thing, and then we just start talking about them one by one. I think it'll wind up being very good, Steve. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, sure. Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for, it was a collaborative effort to come up with a subject and the questions.
Yeah.
So great. Now, I think that does it for this round. And I think that gives us enough to talk about for now. And so thank you, Kevin. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here. And we look forward to hearing what your thoughts are and talking about it.
Yeah. Bring out all your opinions. We want to hear them all, and we really enjoy interacting with everyone. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. You all take care. We'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone.